don't you guys want to get into the Cosby series?
Yeah, we really should.
Yeah.
This is a difficult subject and a difficult thing to watch in some ways. And I also thought though it was really cathartic might be a strong word to use, but definitely something that made me feel like, oh, I've been able to, there's a pressure release valve that we have around Bill Cosby in this culture. And if you go back to when we were talking about maybe it was documentaries or nonfiction movies or something, that one of my picks at some point was Bill Cosby himself, the comedy film, the famous Bill Cosby. I believe it was an HBO thing. But at least that's where I saw it, and that's where we taped it when I was a kid, and where we watched that tape until it wore out, and everyone in the house knew all of his routines by heart. And of course, then the Cosby Show came out and used that material. So that was like when he went into this period of being kind of America's dad, and for all the good he did in his career and all the good he did for people, obviously we know that he's also accused of drugging and raping upwards of 60 women.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a very difficult thing to try to absorb about any one person, but especially someone who had such a specific impact, and especially for what his career and his life meant to black people. I think this documentary, the series, it's a 4-hour documentary, essentially split up over 4 episodes by W. Kamau Bell. It really tries to tackle all the stuff that I just said. So if you're wanting to have that conversation or wanting to just see people hash these things out in a way that might satisfy you on some philosophical level, just that this conversation is happening, I think this show really does all of that and more. But yeah, it's a ride. It definitely will take you through some pretty dark emotions. How did you react to this, Ronald?
I mean, it was really emotional. I mean, my wife was in tears. She and lots of our friends went to historically black colleges solely because of Cosby Show in a different world. Now, one thing that documentaries do, I don't like most documentaries. I have to be completely honest. But what they do sometimes is they scrape the information. It's kind of like an aggregator, and they get like lots of things that you haven't connected with each other and tries to connect them in a way that you may not have remembered that you heard about 20 people during the course of your you know however long you've been alive, or you may not remember that you heard
Right.
about 15 people, 20 people, or even 40 people during the course of our lives, but you probably have heard about at least 20 of his victims during the course of your adult life, right? And to hear these stories, and I've been kind of unpeeling sort of whatever masculinity is over the last couple years. And look, at the beginning of the podcast, we have said and done things that are very different than we would do now.
Yes.
But that's different than what I'd been exposed to when hearing about some of the Cosby stuff. Because like some of it is like jokingly the way that we talk about like attractiveness of a person, right? Versus people creating equations of people's trauma. Like being like, they were in this place, so they did this, so they deserve this thing, right? And that's something I've never had in my vocabulary. I've never had it in my psyche because my parents kind of laid it out for me pretty early that like, there are most people that are victims of this, all of them are undeserving. Like let's just say all. Like there's no one deserves this sort of treatment at all. Ever in this
Right.
lifetime deserves what happened to them, right? And so because of that, I've always been on the side of these women. And I know a lot of people around me, it's not anybody in this conversation that I know will take from this that like it's a setup. It's a conspiracy. I don't understand why this is happening. But I know a lot of people also that will see this information and say, man, I never thought about all this stuff together. And there are like people thought that it was just white women. There are some black women in this equation. There are some Asian women in this equation. There are people of all race, shapes, and sizes throughout 50 years or so that have
Mm-hmm.
been victimized. So when you see all that stuff kind of aggregated together, with also some believe it or not, there's balance in it of them kind of being like, this is what he contributed to the industry. This is what he contributed for black arts. to cinema, to all these cool, amazing things, does not negate that he's done these things. So people have to kind of get out of their heads of emotion of how much you love a person versus what they're capable of. Those are two totally different things. And that conflation sometimes can get very nasty and weird, and people say things publicly that they may not age well. And it messed me up, man. It honestly messed me up. And I could tell that by talking to you, John, that you had a similar sort of feeling.
Yeah. I mean, that we all were sort of complicit in, like, buying into the myth around this guy. You know what I mean? The idea that what he had created around himself was definitely sort of a distortion field around some of the things he was doing. And of course, it sounds, from all accounts, there were people that were close to him that knew what was going on or knew some degree of what was going on all along. And there was some hush-hush. There was a lot of stuff on the sets he worked on that was like, oh, maybe that people witnessed some of the stories that you hear, and some of the women have accounts that clearly there were other people involved and witnesses, but maybe nobody was putting it all together. Maybe nobody was really accounting for it, or maybe we just were a little bit more under the spell of the idea of the sort of great man, you know, the genius that we put up with. And I think that we've talked about this in a lot of different ways. And recently this Joss Whedon story that ran, that people probably either read or heard people talking about, had a similar effect, a different quality of like what he's being accused of. But just these narcissistic men, they set themselves up for such success in our hearts and minds because part of what they do is capitalize on the effect they have, the way that they can galvanize us, the things they do that are legitimately good or great or smart or whatever, or humanistic or whatever it is that attracts you to an artist. And then, of course, Bill Cosby giving millions of dollars to some of the colleges you're talking about, Ronald, and like just being this inspirational sort of figure. And we all felt it curdle a little bit, though, when he kind of became the spokesman for the right way to live. Like, I remember when he started giving those speeches where he would talk about pull up your pants and start speaking English and all that kind of trash. And it's like, I remember when the culture kind of bent away from him a little bit. It was, you know, the documentary addresses that. It also addresses Eddie Murphy's famous routine, you know, tell Bill to have a Coke and a smile and shut up, or shut the fuck up. I don't know why I edited that. But I mean, like, we all quoted that line. We all know that was in the early 80s, mid 80s, that Eddie Murphy was making this comment, that this guy was kind of a hypocrite. So I think it's like, when I mentioned Joss Whedon, I think that it's the hypocrisy that really bugs us about some of these people that puffed themselves up because they had different degrees. And I'm not saying it's a hypocrisy that bugs us more than the rape. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, like, I think what really strikes fears, like, in our hearts about just believing in anybody anymore is the fact that this malignant narcissism can make someone like even better at winning your heart and getting in your mind and everything. And it's the very thing they're going to weaponize against people to do these horrible acts. And in the case of Bill Cosby, they say it in the doc too, but I was thinking it before this point gets made. If we know about upwards of 60, we can just about double or maybe even triple that number over 50 years and say there were a lot of women who just woke up feeling like, what did I drink? And don't have any memory of the night, or people who don't want to come forward. So I think that this idea of listening to victims so that people aren't afraid to come forward, to me, that's always been a very clear line that we can draw, that we can just say we're going to that doesn't mean that we take every account that every person speaks out as that's the absolute gospel truth. It doesn't mean that you need 60 women, though, in order to have the tide turn against someone either. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much, and it's all uneasy, and it's all kind of unresolved, and anything we say right now is we're just kind of hashing through things that this documentary actually addresses. And I think that's what impressed me so much about it, was that it really manages to address a lot of the concerns you might have. And in that way, it's different from the Finding Neverland thing, because that was very pointedly a choice was made from the documentarians to say, we're going to focus on the victims' accounts and we're not going to introduce any other information. But this, because it's more people that are talking after the fact, you get people's opinions about, you get some people saying, you know, it took me a while before I realized I should believe these women. It took me a while before I realized my personal experience with Bill Cosby didn't override this. And some of that you might say, I can't believe that person admitted that they knew about some of this and they still love the guy. But then I go, you know what? I like how honest this documentary is, because there is this cultural attachment to him, and the documentary is not afraid to point out that, like, there's a suspicion on the behalf of all black people anytime a lot of white women accuse a black man of rape or of sexual impropriety of some sort. There's like a cultural reaction against that, because that was used in the past so nefariously by law, but people in the law that were trying to peg people and, like, we're going to pin this on you, So it's like, I like that it addressed that too, because you always have to account for that, how race in America is this completely fucked up thing, and how even someone like Bill Cosby is not immune to that racism in even in this, this culture that claims it's a meritocracy. It reveals itself to really be more corrupt than that all the time. So I don't know. I think that there's something very American about this documentary, and that it addresses something, racism in America. It's part of our story, and race can't be separated from almost anything in America if you're really being honest about it. Right. So I think that, I don't know, to me this just felt like I said, I've been kind of dancing around calling it like good or entertaining or enjoyable, but I do think satisfying or cathartic. It did leave me. I mean, I was kind of a wreck when this thing was over, and I was really looking forward to getting a chance to kind of at least vent with somebody about it. I want to add one little thing though, Ronald, and this is just kind of a note that I had in my head. He seemed like such a control freak, and maybe increasingly in his own little world. Like, you get the idea that he just doesn't permit anybody telling him anything but that he doesn't want to hear. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There's a show. They're talking about how NBC was talking with him about doing a new show when all this hit, and then that deal fell apart. And I thought to myself, what kind of a nightmare would it have been for any producers to work with him on a new sitcom in whatever year it would have been. But it's like, imagine how controlling and out of touch he would have been, and probably monstrous he would have been, even just on set. He really seems like a very imperious guy, and there is something kind of intimidating about him. Throughout the doc, I'm reminded that whole America's Dad thing, it wasn't just because he was cuddly that we called him that. It was also because when he got that serious face and kind of leaned in, you felt like, oh shit,
yeah,
I'm about to get blasted, So I can't
So-
imagine what working with him and giving him notes on his performance or his ideas would be like.
It's the nightmare. So Aaron graduated from Hampton University in 2000. Well, I should say a year. I don't want to.
Yeah.
2000 something. Cosby spoke at her graduation, and his speech was, I basically was like, I'm worried about you guys. So I met Aaron 8 years ago. One of our first dates, she talked about how it destroyed her to have a graduation where you have fought to get to the end and you have a bachelor's degree, and a man gets up and shits on you for 45 minutes straight, telling you how awful you are, you're going to get pregnant early, you're going to get the drugs, you're having premarital sex. It's like, something is wrong with, and I know that some of that comes from losing his son under horrible circumstances, right? But maybe he should have gotten some therapy about that. Maybe he should have bounced some of that stuff with a therapist instead of trying to talk it out on stage and making these like harsh assumptions about large groups of people that just aren't true on the whole. Like, it just
Right.
poor assessments of black people
At a pivotal moment in their lives, too.
at a pivotal moment. And then he kept doing it. Then he went on like a tour, man. So there was a moment in the documentary that sat with me so hard that maybe won't affect everybody the same way, but you got to understand what somebody being victimized by him means, or anyone that's a victim of sexual assault feels like. The lack of sympathy is just heavy, man. People just doubt if you've been assaulted. That is the surface level, right? And I've noticed that your proximity to the victim truly defines how you feel about it. But it should never be like that. Chris Spencer, a comedian who used to host a late night show, Vibe, from the 90s. showing my age. Chris Spencer is talking, and he brings up that he golfs with Beverly Johnson. And Beverly Johnson, he believed Bill Cosby up until this point. But then when he heard her talk, it hit him. A switch went off. And I don't want, and why I'm saying that is I hope and pray that no one on this earth has to go through a situation where you have a switch go off in your head because of proximity to you know what I mean? Like, I want everybody to just know that if somebody had the bravery to say that they've been victimized, that they've been victimized. Just assume that they've been victimized. Don't try to do any you're not an investigator. You aren't a detective. Fucking take people for their word, especially adults. You know, like it's fucking crazy, man. Like, and kids. I mean, obviously anybody, but like, it is infuriating to hear the way that people talk about victimhood and.
Well, I mean, people always act like the knee-jerk reaction that there's some immediate gain that you would get from it. And if you actually look at the story of someone who's gone through it, you realize that someone would have to be pathological to crave that kind of attention and to actually get something positive from it. Because your life gets turned inside out, and people take sides against you, and a lot of people want to come at you and say, well, come on, like you said in this case, what were you doing going there? Why were you with him? You'd heard the stories. Why did you take those pills? I mean, because frequently he's giving someone a pill they think is going to like give them a buzz, not a pill they think is going to them out. And again, it's not to say that like there's a pretty good point made in this thing about rape drugs. There's a chemist, I think, who says, there are rape drugs. There are drugs people can put in your drink that can knock you out and make you extremely susceptible and very vulnerable. But that he said the worst thing in that situation is that you're with a rapist. He said it's not a drug that makes you get raped. It's, the alcohol is as big of a problem as anything with regards to this kind of stuff. A lot of sexual assault happens when people are drunk. So like blaming the drugs or focusing on the rape drug gives people kind of an easy thing to say, well, we've got to watch and make sure someone doesn't slip something into your drink. Right. Make sure someone doesn't, hand you a drink that you didn't see them pour, that kind of thing. But realistically, it's like, and also just, it's like you can't victim blame in this situation. It's like you really just have to look at young men and say, don't rape. Stop rape. There's no way to do that, though. I mean, obviously, this is a problem that's been going on forever, and it's just so sad. And the accounts, if the women in this doc, when they tell their stories, it really slows down and lets them tell their stories. You get the sense that some of them don't want to relive it on camera, and some of them do. And I think it does a nice way of. It's very tastefully done the way that it mixes in some people's accounts, and other people, they talk about other issues around it. But you don't feel like it's just hitting you over and over again with these horrible, horrible stories. But you do have to hear a few of them kind of in detail to understand the scope of what he was doing. And I will say also, remember how in I'll Be Gone in the Dark, how there was a lot of focus on like survivors and maybe even the lives of people who've picked them up. And there was an older couple that had been a victim of this. And they, obviously their relationship had held strong. So many of these people have relationships that fall apart or their lives are very troubled. There was a very similar vibe to the way this documentary treated the victims that were speaking, which is to say, they were given space was given for them just to talk about their human experience beyond the thing that happened to them. And there's one in particular who we get to see that kind of relationship with a spouse that is the kind of thing that might save someone or give someone the strength or help them find the strength to carry on. There was do you know the scene I'm talking about, Ronald, where it's and it just made me think, thank God people have people in their lives. I know that's such a broad thought, but I just was like, again, it's hard to say you can find a ray of sunshine in this thing, but seeing that some of these people have support or are able just to be strong enough and kind of pick themselves up and put themselves back together. But particularly that scene where there's a woman who, one of the victims whose husband, you see what a role he played in like encouraging her to tell her story and to stand by her. It kind of brings it home in a different way.
Yeah, the hurt in his eyes, just believe people, man. If they say that they've been assaulted, just believe them. I cannot stress that enough. It's it's a heavy duty documentary with a lot of nuance. And yeah, that scene that John is talking about is the icing on the cake. You know, you need a good support system, and you need people that believe you, and you need people around you that will let you know that this thing won't define you as a person.
Right.
You know, and I feel like without the proper help, I could see something like that just breaking someone, you know? If you have the stamina, I know, because it's like it is truly it's a thing of stamina. If you could stomach this, I'd say give it a watch. It is powerful, and it really gives you some perspective. There's literally new information in this documentary that's nowhere else. Cool little factoids about him that really it's interesting, man. It's interesting.
And it will make it hurt again too,
Yes.
because you do get, especially in the first episode, it reminds the shit out of you. I don't know if you can use that.
Oh yeah, I know what you're saying.
But like it reminds you of it. It's not afraid to remind you of all the stuff we thought was great about this guy, and like it does make you realize how. I mean, again, it's like I said before. It's like you're realizing, oh shit, the thing that made him so cool is part of what made him able to do this. Like even when he was donating millions to colleges and he was doing all this important stuff that was very humanitarian in its nature, he was in some way he was puffing up his own legend when he was doing that. So it's very hard. I mean, it's not to say that people shouldn't still feel the benefit of what he's done that was good, but it's very hard to like see that as like a pure benefit. Now you look at now him and go, okay, maybe there was some narcissistic need he was feeding in himself, in addition to doing things that were helpful, but it just makes the whole thing feel tainted in some very sad way.
Yeah.
That like it still doesn't erase the good that came from it, but it just complicates things. Yeah, it's very sad, and I think if we haven't turned you off from watching it with all this kind of heavy talk, I do think, like Ronald said, it's the kind of thing that you should probably make some time for, because there's probably not a person listening that doesn't have some meaning in their mind attached to Bill Cosby. Maybe if you're younger, you don't understand just how huge the guy was, but this will give you, like, it will actually mention the time when he had a cartoon on Saturday morning. He was on every commercial. He was like doing Kodak and Jell-O and Coca-Cola, and also had one of the biggest sitcoms in the world that ran for 8 years or whatever. So he was everywhere.
And I hope that I know that my wording probably wasn't perfect at all on any level, but I hope you get that. It's we don't condone that sort of behavior. It's just a really wild, emotional roller coaster, man. And I hope that it creates some dialogue and also defines what rape is. We need to also figure that out, because you could say stop raping, but in some people's minds they imagine it being this like person in a dark alley jumping on someone, versus some of the means that Cosby took to take advantage of people.
Right, someone you trusted, or someone who has
Yes.
power over you, or whatever. The social dynamics are.
We need a proper gauge on what assault is. Like universally, everybody has to be taught what that is. And I feel like people have taken advantage of people with the idea that I'm not this sort of person. I'm not Bill Cosby. I have not done this thing. When in fact you have taken advantage of someone. You have used your power to get things. You have, so that should help create some dialogue, and I hope it does. Yeah, so we need to talk about Cosby. See it if you
And that's coming this weekend.